You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew Ledrew. We are on the line with Gareth Mitton. He is a Manchester native currently who's been living in St. John's for the last 10 years, and he has been making quite a splash for himself recently. He has two projects coming out in the first quarter of 2019. He has some non-fiction work in Breakwater Books' About Face, and he has some fiction work in Engine Books' Dystopia from the Rock, which gets released in late March, around the time of the Sci-Fi on the Rock convention. How are you today, Gareth?
I'm very well, Matt. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Did I get all that right? Was any of that grossly wrong?
No, that was all very, very accurate.
That might be a stretch. Very, like, maybe one very. I don't know.
It was on point.
Okay, wonderful.
Egregiously inaccurate, so let's put it that way.
Okay, great. Well, Gareth, can I get you to tell me a little bit about some of your projects? Specifically, if we can start with About Face. I'm really interested in what that is. I've seen the promo items for it, like the cover is this cool face that seems to be made up of chainmail or black stuff or whatever. It's interesting. It looks almost horror novelish. I had to do a couple takes on it and be like, oh wait, no, this is a non-fiction book. Okay. But
yeah, it is. The cover is really cool.
It is. Yeah, it is very cool.
I was very impressed with it. It's it kind of looks like a face in profile, and it is made up of chains. I think it is. I'm actually holding it in my hand because this dropped in the last couple of weeks. Yes,
this is. It's actually currently on shelves, is it not?
It is, yeah. It's in all good bookstores near you, so do pick up a copy, and it's quite a substantial little book. That was a bit of a oxymoron. Substantial little book. You could wedge open a door with this book if you were so inclined, but I think you'd be better off reading it because a lot of work has gone into this one. So it's edited by Douglas Goss. As you say, it's through Breakwater Books. And the full title is About Face, Essays on Recovery, Therapies, and Controversies of Addictions in Canada. So very, very interesting subject matter. This is a collection of essays, and it really covers the gamut of sort of recovery therapies and as they put it, controversies of addictions in Canada. And it really, I haven't actually read a whole lot of it myself yet because I only got my copy a couple of days ago. But I guess from my perspective, I can speak to that. And my understanding is that they kind of cover essays from people who have suffered from addiction. There's also people kind of on the mental health side, doctors, therapists. There are, academics who are kind of writing from an academic standpoint. So it's a real sort of encompassing look at sort of addiction and recovery and therapy.
Wow.
In Canada, across Canada, and it is Canada-wide too. It's not just Newfoundland. I know they're doing a launch event both here and in Toronto in a couple of weeks.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So from my perspective, I was. It's a long story. I'll try to give you the Coles notes, but the bottom line, I guess, is that I had some trouble with alcohol addiction. I've now just over 6 years since I last had a drink.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's part of this. This whole process is really, it is kind of a catharsis for me because there is obviously a process involved when you've gone through something like that, come out the other side, and you kind of go through a lot of stages with it. But eventually, hopefully, you get to a place where you go, you know what, this is just something that happened in my life, and it's now, to have the opportunity to take that and perhaps through telling my story, maybe help somebody else. If I help one person, then I think that's a worthwhile thing to do. So,
absolutely.
so I, excuse me, I'd seen a call for submissions back last year for this particular book, and I think my wife actually brought it to my attention. She said that might be something that would be of interest to you. And I sat down, and as a writer, you'll kind of appreciate how sometimes things will flow from you, and how sometimes it takes a long time to get thoughts and ideas down on paper.
Yep.
This thing just flowed from me, because they do say, of course, write what you know, and I certainly knew issues with alcohol, so it was my story. So I sat down, I wrote this essay in probably maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then maybe an hour more to edit it, and it was done.
Wow.
It really didn't take very long, because I'd lived it. So, and I guess the Coles notes of my story were, I grew up in northern England. I grew up in what I would call very much, as I'm sure will come as no surprise, quite a drinking culture, really.
And Newfoundland's not innocent in that either. From what it sounds like you moved from a culture that has the drink in its culture, like baked into the cake, as it were, to another place that has the drink baked into the cake.
That would be very accurate. And then when you add to that, and I actually kind of touch upon this, and in the essay, I am also a creative guy. No, I'm not saying that. That's an excuse to be a drinker. But
it's not an excuse, but it happens. Like, it happens enough that it's a documented psychological thing, that writers and creative types tend to be more susceptible to. That's honestly why I've never experimented or anything like that, even in my youth, with other substances, because I was aware that as a creative, I was at a higher risk,
Yeah, and there's an undeniable correlation there.
Yes.
So then you kind of add that in, and I went into quite an early age into the creative marketing world, agency marketing, which again is very much a drinking culture. So you have, on the one hand, somebody susceptible, and on the other hand, all of the environments that encourage it, normalize it. And this was not my essay is actually called The Weekend Alcoholic, which may seem like a bit of a contradiction in terms, because I think when we think about the term alcoholic, we tend to think, somebody wakes up in the morning and immediately needs to drink. That wasn't necessarily my experience with it. I was more of a binge drinker.
Yeah, and honestly, I remember from college that I think I don't know, this was 14 years ago now, so the DSM was very different, but there were at the time I learned it, there were 3 stages of alcoholism, and stage 3 was that, where it's you gotta have it in you all the time. Stage 2 was, you can control when you take a drink, but once you start, that's it, and you're gonna keep drinking till you pass out, basically. And stage 1, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, was binge drinking, where it was you would just drink a lot in a short period of time,
Yeah. So, and I think that's absolutely accurate, and there's certainly a progression there, right? Where in my early drinking days, I probably, from the offset, drank more than others. I kind of had this tendency to stick around and close down the party kind of thing. And what that became over time was, and the other side of this too, which I talk about in the essay, was this great sort of drive. In the day, I was a very successful person. Once I found a niche, I came out of university, went to university in England. I came out of that and pretty soon was in Canada, and I kind of fell into this career as a creative writer in marketing in an ad agency. So you had this sort of real drive where I kind of was incredibly ambitious and, really quite aggressively, and I think that's part of that kind of personality trait too. So what you do is you kind of go through the week, and the drinking becomes kind of this carrot at the end of the week, this reward.
Yeah.
Where, you can go hard and work lots of hours, And I used to refer to it as the reset button. I would hit reset, quote unquote, by drinking myself basically into the point where I would pass out, and then sleep a lot and then get up and do it all again. This became this really unhealthy pattern.
It doesn't sound the most healthy. I'm sadly know what you're talking about to an extent, but yeah, it doesn't sound like the most. When you say it out loud, it sounds super unhealthy. Even just from not even psychologically. I mean, it does, but also just from that can't be good for your body.
Yeah, it definitely takes a toll over time, and and there's also this really bizarre denial that comes with it that most addicts will attest to, where you do attempt to normalize it and you attempt to justify it. To me, it was it took a very long time, and I got quite deep into this before I actually turned around and went, maybe I do have a problem.
Yep.
And people talk about kind of hitting bottom, and I kind of touch upon that. There was one very specific night where, it was quite extreme, and I'd begun in sort of the later stages of this process to just do really weird things that when I was sober I would never dream of doing. Put myself in weird, dangerous situations, and waking up the next day and going, "Wow, did I really do that?" So. It got pretty intense, and it took a long time to admit to it. But then, you do, and but this is the other part of the story and the essay really, is that, people might think, okay, addiction, it's this worsening of the situation, and then this realization that you've got a problem, and then it's like, okay, you get the help, and now things are rosy. But the point at which you make that switch and say, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm not going to drink anymore, is the beginning. It's the beginning of
big time.
I completely, everything. I found that my very identity, I was the heart and soul of the party. Now I don't go to parties all of a sudden. It's so baked into who you are. And bear in mind, I was 33, 34 years old by the time I realized I had a problem. Then, it was really the last few years of really been kind of trying to figure out, who am I without the booze? So that's the other side of it. The effects that it has that you don't realize it's going to have, losing kind of self-confidence, this sense of identity. I definitely went through that. It impacted my work, my career, second guessing things. I guess in a way I kind of had a bit of a early midlife crisis. And I went through so many phases with this. I went, my poor wife has kind of followed me around, and not followed me around, I shouldn't say that. Being there by my side would be a better description.
Both are accurate.
We've gone back to, she was originally from Cowhead, Grossmore, so a very isolated kind of beautiful place, and we lived up there for a couple of years. We lived in a 380 square foot cabin for a year.
That's gorgeous. That sounds amazing.
It was fantastic, but at the same time not massively planned out and not really sustainable.
Do you know how many writers I know that if I was like, how'd you like to live in a cabin in the middle of one of those beautiful parks in the world, they'd be like, yes sir.
Well, that was exactly the ideal that I was attracted to. But there's also certain realities in life. You need to make money. And I beat the streets up there and got in with the tourism crowd. And I did kind of do freelance marketing work for a while. But in the end, it wasn't really sustainable. And actually, the isolation became a little bit too much. It's a good thing in small doses, but maybe not something that you want. Not for everybody all the time, put it that way.
Fair.
So it's kind of been this journey of discovery, of self-discovery, which is a good thing, and I think that's sort of reflected in the story, in the essay. But again, it all comes down to, really, I went through this experience. There's a lot of other things that have happened in our life that we've lived a lot for people our age. There's a lot of sort of things that we're trying to do, that we're talking about doing. I'm by we, I mean myself and my wife. in terms of maybe doing some blogs together and things like that. We've really kind of changed our lifestyle a whole lot in the last few years to something that's a lot healthier. And you when you go through these things, you kind of the whole philosophical side and the spiritual side are things that you really start to think about. And our lives have changed quite a bit, and we've changed quite a bit. Unfortunately, we've kind of moved along together. So yeah, it's become really interesting and kind of a source of, we've learned some things that maybe now we can share with others and might be helpful with others. And the essay in this wonderful publication is definitely a part of that.
Great. That sounds wonderful. Speaking of your wife, if I'm allowed to name drop, your wife is an author who could be on this show at some point herself. Your wife is Jessica Mitton, is she not?
My wife is Jessica Mitton. Yeah.
Yeah, she is the best-selling cookbook author currently, right?
She absolutely is. Yeah. Her. If I'm allowed to name it.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah,
so
of course.
Her cookbook is called Some Good.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's on my bookshelf.
Wonderful, good man.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
So Jess has a really interesting story, and I guess I won't steal her thunder because
hopefully she'll come on eventually. So
yeah, so she has a super interesting story. She had health issues of her own that she really kind of made her turn around and again look at the way she was living her life from a dietary standpoint, from a lifestyle point of view. And she got really interested in nutrition and actually went back to school because she's a business major who worked in a bank for a number of years and kind of went back to school and studied nutrition and really got passionate again. Sort of, it really kind of plays into this whole thing that I'm describing, where we've gone through major lifestyle changes as a result of some pretty extreme life challenges, let's say.
I've been wanting to pick her brain personally ever since I've been reading her book, but I love her book and I've tried out some of the recipes, but my partner and I both have pretty extreme allergies, so I've been I've been tempted to reach out and pick her brain about what would you do if you couldn't have these things.
Oh yeah. And I think that's really what's really cool about the book, because the book is, gluten-free, refined sugar-free, and dairy-free recipes that actually taste good. And that's an interesting thing about, and we kind of talk about, creativity. And Jess, I guess, has never really considered herself quote unquote a creative person. And
one of my first jobs was as a cook, and I know from firsthand it's a very creative field. She's
incredibly creative, and that's really kind of where she's found her creative outlet. But it's creative, but it's also very very kind of mechanical in a way as well, because when you're dealing with substituting things like flour in baking, then you need to be creative. Like she'll mix like 2 or 3 different types of flour for a specific type of baked good, because that maybe gives the texture that she wants. So there's tons of this very kind of scientific experimentation as well.
Yeah.
But it's also really, really creative. And when you're trying to make things that taste good, as well as being good for you, and as well as omitting these ingredients that may not be good for everybody, that's a challenge. It's a challenge to make it taste good without the conventional ingredients, and that's really where she's found her sort of sweet spot in creating something that's really kind of beneficial for people. So I think that's what's really neat about the book. And the book also kind of draws from traditional Newfoundland ingredients and dishes, things that kind of grow here, like the berries, and it's just a real interesting mix of tradition and really kind of forward thinking in sort of a culinary recipe kind of sense.
Nice. No, that makes a lot of sense. I can't wait to have her on and pick her ear about some stuff.
If we can anytime, man. She'll give you advice. She lives for that stuff.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Well, if I can switch gears, I would like to talk about your upcoming contribution to Dystopia from The Rock, which is not out yet. That's coming out in March 2019 from Engine. You've been kind of circling. I've been seeing you at Engine events for quite some time. You were telling me the other day about, being at the Chillers launch and thinking to yourself some stuff. Can you tell me that story?
Absolutely. So I've always obviously written, but I haven't written fiction prolifically, let's say. Like my whole career has been as a writer.
You were a creative copyright for a while, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially still what I do. I've bounced around different jobs, but a lot of my 15-year career has been spent in ad agencies, so coming up with like commercials and ad campaigns and things like that.
Fun.
Which is, what's really interesting about that is it's kind of these really short bursts of creativity, right? So you kind of work on a project for, however long it may be, and you kind of put all your creative juice into that, and it kind of is this thing, and it goes out into the world, and then it's okay, what's the next one? That is quite different from writing, long prose, and I'd started in university. In university, it was really odd. I decided I was going to write some fiction, and I'm going to write a novel. I don't know why. Didn't start with short stories, and that became almost like a 20-year albatross in a way, because and I think a lot of writers kind of have the novel that they is never really finished. I mean, that's like one of the oldest writer jokes in the book, but that was really true for me. Like, that took me a really long time to get that knocked into some kind of shape. But in recent years, and sort of through these experiences that I've been having in my life, I really wanted to rekindle my love for just writing stories. So I did start writing a couple of short stories, and just started, seeing. I started sort of poking my nose in at what the local fiction writing scene was, and I think Newfoundland is a really super rich environment for creativity in general. It's crazy to me the amount of musicians, writers, poets, storytellers. It's a phenomenal place for that. But I did also find the flip side was there's a lot of kind of traditional stuff, and what I tend to write, what tends to come out of me, is much more sort of an old school science fiction type. We are of a generation that we did grow up on that stuff. One of my earliest memories of my father was sitting on his lap and watching James T. Kirk.
My earliest memory of my father is sitting on his lap and watching Captain Picard. So, right. Same thing, except mine's clearly better.
It really is. Because I can definitely attest to that, because I had that sentimentality. So my dad, he wasn't having Picard as a star. To quote my dad, he said, "He's no starship captain." My dad liked his starship captains to be of a certain era, fisticuffs, rough and tumble, rugged, handsome. He wasn't really for the Shakespearean intellectual captain. I always had that kind of sentimental view of the original series, and of course recently now we have these wonderful streaming services, and we can go back and watch this stuff, and I really tried to watch the original series, but it's so bad. It has not aged well.
But you can watch Next Generation, you can still watch that. It's aged poorly in a few, I find whenever something that takes place far in the future tries to do a socially conscious episode, it's always going to be wrong, because real society will have caught up before the imaginary society does, Yeah,
absolutely. But you have to look at things through the lens of the time it was made. And
absolutely. I always kind of say that when I'm dealing with people writing in the future or talking about futuristic stories. It's that, Ray Bradbury wasn't doing the future of now, he was doing the future of 1960.
Absolutely. So my influences are kind of many, is sort of where I was going with it. But one of the biggest influences, I think, when I was a kid, was Blade Runner.
I can see that in your work, absolutely.
Yeah, and me and millions of others, for sure. I mean, I think the effect that Blade Runner... I remember games coming out for the original PlayStation, and they would actually use the description, a Blade Runner-esque cityscape.
Yeah.
That was like, oh, that's really cool because it's Blade Runner-esque. So that's the level of influence that
I love how you could easily just to say, here's a game that's a Blade Runner ripoff. I don't know what game you're talking about. You could say that. But if you just take the word ripoff and you change it to esque, suddenly it's okay.
Yeah, suddenly it's cool and inspired by versus copyright infringement.
Yes, I've noticed that. The difference between homage and ripoff is if I like it. If I like it, it's a homage. If I didn't like it, it's a ripoff.
I think that's perfect. Yeah.
So your dystopia story. Broad strokes, what's your dystopia story about? It's partially inspired by some of these influences, is it not?
Yeah, 100%. I think everything that I write is probably inspired by these kinds of influences. The Coles Notes on Watcher is the name of the story.
Yes, it is.
I had this weird idea for, I want to say, 25 years, like
Jeez.
Maybe more. Yeah, it was kind of like the Big Brother thing in a way. It may have come to me in a dream. A lot of these things do, but I had this image of it was kind of like, I knew it was kind of off planet. It was in space. It was some kind of a space station or a colony way in the future, and I think the original kind of concept, like the walls were all transparent. It was this future where privacy was basically gone. Everybody had forgotten what really privacy meant, because, and again, most of what I write is kind of this semi-technophobic kind of where's society going in relation to technology, because I don't think you can separate the two at this point. They're just so intertwined.
Sure.
So I had this vision where, and it just seems like privacy just keeps getting hacked away, and we just feel it's almost as though it's being done at such a steady pace over time that we accept a little bit more invasion of privacy, revealing a little bit more of ourselves, and what's the sort of end result of that. So I think it kind of explores that. But instead of the transparent walls, what it ended up being was this kind of future where we have these Watcher characters.
One second, Gareth.
Yep.
Sorry. We have these sort of Watcher characters.
Yeah, so the Watchers are basically they're almost on the fringes of society. And they've got this kind of implanted ocular technology, so they're kind of able, just through the use of their eyes, everything's kind of projected onto their eyes. Nobody else sees what they see, but they can kind of spy on the masses. Basically, they have the power to do that, and they're sort of working with the government, and they're just keeping an eye on people in that Big Brother way. But it kind of opens up this really interesting, because another thing I'm really interested in is, where does the technology go? We've gone from sort of, desktop to handheld to wearable. It seems to me that the only place we can possibly go next is augmented, is, the tech actually being, we become cyborgs. It's going to have to go inside of us, because that's the only place it can logically go next.
That's fair. Yeah.
So that's sort of what's happened in this future, and these Watcher characters, have this tech, and they can kind of watch people, and there's a lot of that kind of Big Brother kind of aspect to it. But they also, I also wanted to explore, what does that do to a person, mentally. And it's funny because it almost comes full circle back to the addiction thing.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, that if you were given that kind of power, that could easily go to your head. And what would you want? It's human nature just to want more, right?
Yeah.
So it has this kind of addictive effect, and maybe they'd want more technology, better technology. They'd want to see more, further, deeper into people's lives. And what kind of psychological effect would that have? And if somebody wants to then mess with that, what might happen.
Thank you, Gareth, for coming on there.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
I'll talk to you soon, and we will see you at the launch for Dystopia on the Rock.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in, and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.